Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 10 of the anime series Plastic Memories. And this episode really played out exactly how I speculated it would in my previous episode discussion video. As we saw, Kazuki was mainly about trying to prompt Arda to embrace her emotions, to stop pushing Tsukasa away and embrace her, affection for him or love for him, and realize how important those emotions and those feelings are, and how much worse she's going to make it if she, stays away from him as she's been doing. And the thing about this episode, though, there were a couple episodes in the early going of this series that they started tiptoeing on eggshells, and they were really slow to the punch getting to a certain point every now and then. And I remember thinking, if this series can hold my interest, which it largely has, I'd be surprised in those moments. And this is the first time, the last episode and this episode, where it's starting to come back to that. I feel like they are really slow on the uptake. They're moving at a snail's pace to get to the point. And they really kind of, at the end of the last episode, we have Kazuki pulling this, she's not pulling any punches. She's like, that's it. I dissolve you two. I dissolve your partnership. This is all BS. You're not working together anymore. This is too frustrating to watch and all this stuff. And she goes a little bit more into this in the discussions she has with Tsukasa and everything in this episode. But they entirely undermine that sort of, leadership that she has in making this decision by, when we pick up with this episode, she takes Ira back to her place and she's like, well, now that I put my foot in my mouth, what do I do next? And that kind of was frustrating to me. Also, it's been frustrating to me that Ida is so slow on the uptake to reveal and, sort of encounter her own emotions and embrace them. I'm not expecting this to go, rapid fire, but I mean, it takes her the whole episode and going on this mission where they're basically looking to reclaim the right-hand lady Giftia of this mob boss, this mafioso and everything. And Ida is in the spotlight. We basically see, as per the unfolding conversation with the now sidled up partnership of Tsukasa and Constance, they're going back and forth between this conversation about how much Ida has changed since the beginning of the series. And this is something I've come to appreciate, being a fan of her, being a fan of the story, and seeing her evolve and come back out of her shell little by little. Of course, it's been, again, to use that term, kind of a tiptoeing on eggshells at a very slow pace to see this character arc develop. And it's almost thrust upon us in this episode, like, with such immediacy, kind of almost a 180-degree turn from that snail's pace I'm talking about with everything else. Because, you're seeing Kazuki and, Ida, they're almost coming to physical blows over all of this realization that Kazuki is trying to force into her mind. You told this mafioso that he should spend the last moments he has with this right-hand lady of his that he has feelings for, perceptive as Ida was about that, because perchance she could relate. But, Kazuki's like, you're telling him that. You're telling them both that. Spend the day together. Spend your last moments in love. Let your hair down. Let this facade of a business relationship, be cast aside and just share your time personally together. And that's exactly what Ida is refusing to do for herself and Tsukasa. And it's just like, getting to that point and seeing the voices being raised and the argumentative nature going on and building to what I thought was just going to be an almost, inexplicable tearing apart of Kazuki and Ida. But in fact, this is what finally speaks to Ida. And it's just frustrating that, it feels like she should have come to this conclusion sooner. She's very much being, sort of a little brat in that she doesn't want to change her ways. She's made her decision, and she's going to be as reluctant as she can to listen to reason, showing levels, I guess you could say, of her youth. It doesn't work that well. It wasn't well balanced enough, because we have Kazuki, who's obviously a drunkard and a party animal, and she does utter my favorite quote from my favorite anime character of all time, Spike Spiegel. She says, whatever happens, happens. Then she gets, 3 sheaths to the wind, ends up marking up, Ida's face with paint and everything like that. And it's goofy and it's funny and whatever, but, we can see that there is conflict between them, and the conflict, it's like, finally, we have an answer as to what this is all about heading into the end of this episode. Levels of, between Constance and Tsukasa, we find out Ida was the one, not Kazuki. Ida was the one who came up with this idea for the terminal service that they all, happen to work in, to extend a more compassionate hand, unlike any of the other terminal services. In the previous episode, we were told this was Kazuki's doing. We find out, no, it was Ida. She used to be more outgoing. She used to be more personal in her relationships and, not afraid to put herself out there in different various ways, because that idea of her time being limited hadn't occurred to her. And with the sort of 1-2 jab of Kazuki breaking off the partnership with, all of that, the ramifications of that left both of them to kind of become more internal and reserved. Kazuki's still outgoing and bossy pants and everything like that. But as far as the interpersonal relationships, as far as her relationship with Ida, they both care immensely about each other. And that's like the only saving grace for all the tiptoeing around the tulips that they were doing that was getting really under my skin. Finally, we get to the culmination of this episode, and that was the entirety of the saving grace for me. The emotions behind Ida finally going up to Tsukasa and explaining all of this stuff that she's been feeling about not wanting to hurt him, and realizing finally through what, she and Kazuki have been through with this particular job and with their conflict and their discussion, their argument and everything, finally realizing that she's only hurting him that much more. And what's worse is hurting herself. And so she very much professes her love for him in return for the love he still feels for her. And I love the congratulatory all throughout the office. Everyone is happy. I'm happy. Like, they finally left off with just this feeling. I was getting emotional. I was getting misty-eyed watching this. I was so happy. It was happy tears, whatever. But I was like, finally. It took so long to get to this point. I feel like it shouldn't have taken this long. I feel like they were really just putting us through a rigmarole that was highly unnecessary. But we finally got there. We finally got there by the end of this episode. And for that, I enjoyed it. It's not always going to be a home run every single episode of an anime series you watch. Sometimes, you're going to have hits and misses and everything. And this one was almost a miss for me until we finally got to that point. Until I realized, okay, finally we're getting to where I thought we were going. And probably should have gotten there earlier, but at least we're there now, is kind of how I left this episode. And, it's just interesting to me, like, what is going to be the step-by-step process that we move on from here? Because I think there's, 2-3 episodes left of this series or something like that. And so I'm assuming the feels are going to become just tantamount. The most paramount aspect. I think we're maybe going to jump ahead a little bit. I don't see this series, if they're smart, I don't see them leaving off with a cliffhanger like this is still yet to come. But then again, they might want to try to stretch this story out to another season, and I kind of feel badly about that. It's kind of, to the talking point of this particular video and how I reacted to this episode, let's not stretch this out longer than it needs to, I feel like the next couple episodes really ought to be about the finality of this scenario and the ending, coming to a definitive end with these characters. Ida's time is limited. And I think with certain aspects of how this show has dealt with relationships in a sort of realism, there is absurdity, there's comedy and everything else, but you have a really heartening focus at the end of the day in this series. And I really feel like to do anything less than just play out realistically with the finality of Ida's life coming to an end. And as I've talked about through several videos, the idea that in the aftermath, maybe there will be a level of comfort and friendship burgeoning between Tsukasa and Michiru, maybe even more. And you could see, you know, if they want to do like a sequel series, a follow-up, you know, season, maybe it could be the ramifications of, well, Ida comes back into the office, but she's not Ida anymore. She's a new person, and Tsukasa's dealing with that, and, you know, having to move beyond that. But I feel like they'd be grasping at straws. I mean, if they really want to bring this to a close in a very artistic and valuable way, I think you don't string this story on, you know, longer than it needs to go. And that's kind of why, you know, they probably could have wrapped this up in 11 episodes if the last couple and some of the earlier episodes in this particular season didn't have to just take forever to get to a point that we all knew they were, or at least I suspected they were going to, and then they ended up, you know, they did go to. So yeah, I mean, I still enjoyed this episode for what it was worth, and it just, there was some minor quibbles about, you know, finally getting to the point, as I say. But I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what your reaction to this episode was. If you had a similar reaction, if those tiptoeing through the tulips was getting a little unnerving for you as well, or if you thought it was all pitch perfect. We don't have to agree on everything, and I love having the conversation with you guys in the comments, as I always say. So otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. I hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.